I've come here today to an RAF base, or is it an American base, at Fairford in Gloucestershire, dressed as a Welsh weapons inspector to inspect what weapons of mass destruction they're planning to drop on Iraq. The press recently reported this is the most complex, largest, most expensive operation ever undertaken by Gloucestershire Constabulary. They reckon that it's going to cost the British taxpayers £7 million just to police this base. And there's 1,000 police here, which seems rather over the top considering that this is a peaceful demonstration by ordinary people who are protesting against this imminent war against Iraq.
You stand over here, please, sir. Section 44 of the Terrorism Act.
I've just been stopped under the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2000 for some unknown reason to me. I'm not a terrorist, they're the terrorists over there. During the early hours of March the 20th, 2003, the B-52 bombers took off from Fairford for their 5-hour flight to Iraq. In the words of the Pentagon, to shatter Iraq physically, emotionally and psychologically, a policy known as shock and awe.
After another night of US and British air assault on Baghdad, the city's Al-Kindi teaching hospital received some 120 civilian patients. 10 were dead upon arrival. A patient said they have been attacked by cluster bombs.
Among other ordnance dropped on Iraq, that's what they were dropping from Fairford, cluster bombs, which are actually released landmines. Their effects are indiscriminate. They don't routinely explode on impact, but can remain to exact a deadly toll for years to come, especially on children, who easily mistake the half-buried yellow cylinders for a toy or a ball. I don't think we'll ever make the world a secure place by spending billions of pounds on heinous weapons systems like cluster bombs. I've been thinking, if I was to give money to a terrorist organisation, then that would be construed as an act of terrorism. If I paid money to a contract killer or an assassin, that in law would be an act of murder. When I pay my taxes to the armed forces, then I'm morally accountable for all of their activities and all of the results. It's being estimated that the war against Iraq is going to cost 3, 4, 5, maybe £6 billion. The Treasury is being pretty cagey about figures. And this is the same Treasury, incidentally, that spends every year 20 times more on military expenditure than it spends on the environment, and spends 10 times more every year on the military than it does on international development. They say they want to make poverty history or fight global warming. Well, I just don't get it, really. The war's been going on for 3 weeks now, and it's not looking good. There's been reports of terrible civilian casualties, and one story particularly has moved me. It's the story of a 12-year-old, Ali Ismail Abbas, who's lost his whole family and both his arms when a missile hit his home about 3 nights ago. No, I don't want to be made complicit in this. I'm going to bite the bullet. I've got an end-of-year tax bill, and I'm writing to the Inland Revenue asking that 10% of my income tax allocated to military expenditure be redirected to peaceful purposes instead. For instance, the Department of International Development. I believe that in the case of war and deliberate killing, that I have a right to determine how my taxes are spent, and by withholding 10% of my taxes, I'm exercising that right. My local MP opposed the war and also happens to be a shadow defence secretary, so I'm meeting him to see what he thinks about my decision to withhold taxes.
Well, I think it's a great idea that you could sort of somehow withdraw your taxes from paying for something or other, but the practicalities of that and the reality of that, frankly, I can't really see how that would work. People, for example, who don't have children, well, they would be say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want my taxes to go to pay for state education. People perhaps who are fit and healthy would say, well, I don't want my taxes to go and pay towards the health service. People perhaps who have their own private retirement income would say, well, I don't want to pay national insurance because I've got my own money set aside for my retirement. Why should I pay for the state pension? I think the reality is, if you live in a democratic, civilized society, which despite everything I think Britain is, then I think you accept that as part of that, you make your taxes and you pay your contribution. And if the people don't like that, then they must consider whether they want to stay in this country or not.
But I think that paying taxes for pensions, schools and hospitals is very different from paying taxes towards the military. Pensions, school and hospital budgets don't go towards deliberate killing. Military budgets do. And for this reason I continue withholding my taxes, and I'm summoned to appear in court.
On 104, 104.6 and 94.7 FM, BBC Hereford and Worcester News.
And so at 5 o'clock on Friday the 29th of August, Bethan Bell has tonight's main stories.
An author who's refusing to pay part of his income tax because he disagrees with the war in Iraq has had his case thrown out by a judge. If he continues to refuse to pay, he could end up in jail.
Despite talk of imprisonment, I've decided to carry on withholding my £750. And so the judge apparently has issued a warrant for bailiffs to seize my goods. So my family and I waited for the bailiffs to come. For 3 months we waited. They finally turned up on my first day at a new teaching job in Hereford. It was disarming and disquieting to think that someone had been watching so that they could arrange for bailiffs to come the first day they definitely knew I wouldn't be there. My mobile phone went off, second lesson in the morning, and it was my wife saying that there were 2 bailiffs at our door with a warrant. I couldn't leave my class, and anyway my work's 8 miles away by bus, so I phoned the bailiffs, who told me that unless I gave them my credit card details, they were going to take our car away. They said that their visit alone was going to cost £600, and so on top of court costs, fines and interest, My original sum withheld of £750 had now become a bill of over £1,700. I've got a young family to support, and I decided I had no option but to pay up. So I suppose I've been conscripted into this war like the rest of the British taxpayers. It's a difficult process doing something like this on your own. And I do feel I need some solidarity, really. You've been quite vociferous about this war against Iraq, and I just wonder if millions who've marched and thousands signed petitions and all the rest of it, that at the end of the day we've all, as taxpayers, had to actually pay for the war, so in a sense we've all become financial conscripts. Do you feel...
I've always felt, that somehow we can't ever find enough money to feed our kids, look after our elderly, better our schools, but we can always magically come up with billions of pounds to fight a war.
It's a very good argument to raise, because it forces people to confront the reality that they're funding these crimes, that however much we say not in our name, it is in fact being done in our name, and certainly our money is making it possible.
We are all implicated in this. We all have blood on our hands, because those of us who are taxpayers have paid for it. I have paid for the war in Iraq, you have paid for the war, well maybe you haven't, but the great majority of people in this country have paid for the war in Iraq, whether we want to or not, and therefore we are morally implicated, we are morally responsible for what went on.
Well, there is an interesting history, which I think goes back to Thoreau in the last century, and more recently Joan Baez, who have refused to pay their taxes because they profoundly and fundamentally disagreed with wars that their own governments were fighting. I think that's a very honourable form of statement of citizen independence, their right for their taxes to be used in a way which they approve of when we're talking about war and peace.
It's interesting to learn that there is a historical tradition of war tax resistance, particularly in the United States, and I'd like to discover more. So I've arranged to meet Anthony Osborne, a historian who lectures in American Studies.
In the 17th and 18th century, Quakers refused to contribute taxes towards the colonial military campaigns. And in 1846, the Quakers again refused to pay their taxes. And it was the Mexican War which led the writer Thoreau to also refuse to pay his taxes, an action which subsequently resulted in his imprisonment. In the end, somebody paid the taxes for him, and so his protest ended abruptly. But not ending his opposition there, he decided to commit his feelings in writing and published the pamphlet on the duty of civil disobedience in 1849. And it was this pamphlet which was to inspire the likes of Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King, and the civil rights movement a century later.
Must the citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first, and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law, so much as for the right.
In the century after Thoreau's protest, wars began to be fought on an industrial scale, the hallmarks of conflict becoming total war involving whole societies and world war spanning the surface of the globe. In the First World War, over 9,700,000 troops lost their lives, including 885,000 troops from Britain. Every family, including my own, ravaged by war. During the first 14 days of the war, 20,000 British troops lost their lives. And as the horrors of modern warfare began to invade public consciousness, the flood of volunteers was soon reduced to a trickle. Compulsory call-up, conscription, became inevitable. And in 1916, the Military Service Act was passed, making military service for all able-bodied single men compulsory. Within the Act was a conscience clause giving those who objected to deliberate killing exemption from military service. 16,000 conscientious objectors claimed the right to refuse to kill, and while 1,300 were sent to prison, most were assigned non-combatant duties, such as working with ambulance units as medics or as stretcher bearers. British conscription ended in 1919, but resumed 20 years later as World War II broke out, when 60,000 objectors claimed the right to be exempted from military service. While most conscientious objectors again worked in non-combatant roles, some became guinea pigs in medical experiments. But it was the Cold War that brought conscientious objection to paying for war back towards the limelight. As the Soviet Union and the United States of America acquired enormous arsenals of weapons of mass destruction, the nature of military confrontation changed. Rather than tackle each other head-on, superpower governments fought indirectly in so-called proxy wars with devastating effects. This was nowhere more apparent than during the Vietnam War, which provoked widespread opposition in the United States and around the world. In 1964, the singer Joan Baez withheld a portion of her taxes in protest at the war. She was followed by the academic Noam Chomsky, the poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and the Nobel Prize winner for medicine Albert Ghiocchi, motivating 20,000 other citizens to withhold their taxes. And as the Vietnam War ended in 1975, the modern war tax resistance movement was born. In 1981, when Ronald Reagan became President of the United States, the Cold War intensified.
Let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world.
Global military spending reached new heights despite widespread public alarm about the spread of nuclear weapons.
I'm going to drop a 20 megaton bomb right on this great lawn as ground zero. It would vaporize every person out to a radius of 6 miles from here and destroy every building.
As states increasingly acquired high-tech and sophisticated weapon systems with awesome destructive power, mass physical conscription became a thing of the past. Conscientious objectors began to assert that financial conscription had replaced physical conscription, a position unconsciously affirmed by the United States Secretary of State Alexander Haig in 1982.
Let them march all they want as long as they continue to pay their taxes.
In the mid-1980s, as American intercontinental cruise missiles were deployed on British soil, some British citizens began to refuse to pay their taxes towards nuclear weapons, and in 1986, for the first time since physical conscription had ended, a conscientious objector was sent to prison.
Well, I have such strong conscientious objections to paying for these, particularly for these weapons of mass destruction.
In the 1990s, others were sent to prison for refusing to pay for a new kind of war. The American and British aerial assault on Iraq, beginning mid-January 1991, was the most intensive in history. 110,000 aerial sorties, 88,000 tons of bombs, the equivalent of 7.5 Hiroshimas, unleashed in just 42 days. During the First Gulf War, 16 British military personnel and 158 Americans lost their lives. Between 30,000 and 150,000 Iraqis lost theirs. The nature of warfare had changed completely. At the beginning of the 20th century, 80% of war fatalities were combatants. But by the end of the century, 80% of war fatalities were civilians. And things weren't going to get any better. What do you think about people like myself who refuse to fund war by paying the 10% of the taxes that go towards military expenditure?
I think they're right, because we need people to stand up for this kind of thing, like in Iraq. Often what's happened, we just obey and say nothing, but I think we need more people like you.
It's not a good idea, because we elect our government democratically, and then that's the official process, and you can't just object on anything you want, because then you could get people objecting on more and more minor issues, and the whole thing would just get out of control with people doing whatever they want.
I think military expenditure is an expensive thing. War's an expensive game. If we've got to pay it, then we all should pay it at the end of the day. Yeah.
They still live in a country that's being defended by the armed forces, and if we were invaded or something, they'd probably start complaining about why there's no army, and they should have to pay for it.
I don't think it's sufficient to say I'm against it to withhold taxes, so I'm not in favour of withholding taxes. I am, however, in favour of conscientious objectors making their views well known to everyone, so we can try and reduce the levels of violence in modern society.
It's a year now since the war started, and I'm off to the Inland Revenue offices to pay this year's income tax bill. Again, I'm going to ask that the revenue redirect 10% of my taxes away from military expenditure to non-violent methods of conflict resolution instead. 6 weeks later, inevitably, I'm called to appear in court again, and this time 3 magistrates tell me that although they understand my decision to refuse to pay for war, they have no alternative to initiate legal action against me. It's a catch-22 situation, really. If I pay up, I become involved against my conscience in state-institutionalized violence. If I follow my conscience and refuse to pay, then I'm treated like a criminal. And although the magistrates were considerate, they only have the power to enforce the law as they see it. They don't have the power to change the law. So I think it's time I did some serious research to try and find out who else is out there who feels as I do that a law that compels conscientious objectors to pay for war is a law that needs changing. I've found a national organisation called Conscience, the Peace Tax Campaign, that is seeking to win the legal rights for conscientious objectors to have the military part of their taxes redirected to a fund that can only be used for peaceful purposes. Conscience has over 2,000 members across Britain and is supported by 60 MPs from across the political divide. I've joined up, and I'm delighted that Conscience has put me in touch with 6 other taxpayers around the country currently facing legal proceedings for refusing to pay for war. The first person I'm going to visit is a Quaker who, as a matter of conscience, is withholding about the same sum as I withheld last year, £750. the amount Britain spends every 10 seconds on occupying Iraq. Robin Brooks is a self-employed toy designer who lives in Wiltshire, and he's expecting the bailiffs round any day now, and apparently he's pinned the £750 he's withholding in £10 notes on a notice board for the bailiffs to unpick. So the aim is, Robin, then, to bring the bailiffs in here and say...
That's basically it. When they arrive, tell them what it's about, and then bring them in and say, well, there it is, and you can sort of see what it says. Sort of every 10 seconds, Britain spends this much on occupying Iraq. And I was going to pin up next to it. You've got each family pays this much each year to finance war, and that one next to it would say this much could pay for. And then I've got enough food and coal for 100 Ukrainian families for a month, equipment for 6 primary schools in Kosovo, basic healthcare clinic for 6 months in Bangladesh. So, sort of just makes the point. I'll take this down now. I'm a bit security conscious.
Apart from sending in the bailiffs, the Inland Revenue has the power to garnish a person's bank account, take money out without their permission, as has happened to a retired literacy teacher I'm going to see who lives in Oxford, who first withheld her taxes at the outbreak of the Gulf War in 1991, and who has recently appeared in court again for the 4th time.
If you hold the conviction that I do, that we have to try to love our neighbours, I'm told that every Sunday when I go into church, love your neighbour. And if I try to do that, and at the same time I'm expected to plot his death and to contribute to it, be made, I think the word I should use is complicit in it, by contributing the money that helps to make it possible, then I think I've every right to refuse to do it. And I think it's worth making a fight about that. I think it should be possible to do that.
It's outrageous, I think, that the Inland Revenue's got the power to take money out of a person's bank account without their permission. Shocking that they've done that to someone like Brenda. When it comes to war, the state's got 2 powers. It's got the power to conscript. It's also got the power to tax, and Brenda has now been conscripted into this war. Manchester next, where I'm looking forward to meeting Dr. Birgit Wolm, a German-born doctor and psychiatrist who works with young offenders, and who, as a matter of conscience, has recently appeared in court for asking that her income tax be spent on peace-building initiatives instead of on war.
I was disappointed with the court case because I didn't really have a chance to explain in details my reasons and my conscientious objections. It's very important to me as a Quaker and as a doctor that I live in peace with other people. I believe that violence is not a good way to solve conflicts, and I believe that each individual has the right to live and the right to liberty, and paying my taxes to spend on weapons that are then used in wars is really very much against my beliefs as a Quaker, but also as a professional, as a doctor.
Next stop, Sheffield, to meet Simon Hayward, a university lecturer in folklore and creative writing, who first withheld his taxes at the outbreak of the war against Iraq in 2003, and despite appearing in court, continues to withhold the military portion of his taxes.
I mean, I want to get one thing straight. I'm very happy to contribute to the defence of the community of which I'm a part. My point is not that I don't have responsibility for defence. My point is the fact that the armed forces, as they're currently set up, don't provide the best available means of defence. In fact, very often a lot of the actions that have been taken by the armed forces in my lifetime, from Northern Ireland right the way down to Iraq, have actually served to put the citizen body in greater danger than they were in before. They weren't about defending at all. By speaking up against the current system and by refusing to cooperate with it, I am in fact contributing to the defence of my community, much more than I would be if I was paying up without so much as a murmur. It's irresponsible not to protest, I think, the way the system's set up at the moment.
Back to my homeland, North Wales, where I've arranged to meet Sian Cooper, a single mother and a devout Buddhist who has also recently appeared in court for withholding her taxes.
Well, I've been a Buddhist for 33 years or so, and I've taken a vow from the Dalai Lama not to kill, among other things. And if I pay my taxes in full, knowing that whatever percentage, 10% or probably more these days, with Trident, will go towards killing people, then that would be breaking my vow, so I can't do that. As you can see, it's very peaceful here, except when one of these warplanes go over to practice in order to kill people. A lot of the problem of the world is people making money out of weapons and out of wars, and somehow that's got to be sorted out. But if governments didn't pay for it, and if people who support the governments didn't pay for it, it'd be a big help.
It was interesting to find so many people around the country who feel as I do, and my last port of call is southeast of England, where there's a chartered accountant who's recently appeared in court.
The bringing of the Human Rights Act directly into British law brought with it the right to freedom of expression of one's conscience and of one's religion. And my religion is pacifist. I'm a Quaker, and how that manifests is that I really believe it's absolutely wrong in all circumstances to kill somebody else, no matter what the reason. This is in conflict now with the government's right to tax me, because the government says it can tax me and use that money to go and kill other people or prepare to kill other people in my name with my money. Years ago they would have ordered me to go and fight. War has changed, but they would have ordered me to go and fight, and had they done so, I would have had the right to conscientious objection. I would have had to do something else in place of it, or maybe I'd have been given absolute exemption. I would have to face a tribunal for them to decide that. But the modern equivalent, paying one's tax for somebody else to go and do it, the government say is not a conscientious objection, and I say they're wrong.
If Roy is right, and the bringing of the Human Rights Act directly into British law has brought with it the right to freedom of conscience, then why does the state still treat conscientious objectors like criminals? The big question now is, does the Human Rights Act apply to taxation? I think I need to try and speak to a lawyer. I'm in the queue waiting to see Philippe Sands QC, author of Lawless World, and hopefully we'll be able to get an interview with him afterwards. We'll see.
The Human Rights Act governs all forms of governmental activity, and in principle it applies to the Treasury, and it applies to any decisions made by the British government in committing expenditures from public funds, including funds raised by tax. So in theory and in principle, decisions of this kind are subject to compliance with the Human Rights Act.
So yes, the Human Rights Act does apply to taxation, and there are now two parts of English law which are incompatible. The seven of us decide to meet up in Birmingham to work out how we can best challenge current policy. Individually, the costs of taking on the power of the Treasury and their lawyers and barristers to bring the law into coherence are astronomical. But collectively, we might just be able to do it. First, though, we need to come up with a name.
Should be something like maybe war tax, tax war resistance, people. Birmingham 7 or war tax resistance UK. Or any other suggestions you might have.
War tax 7.
Peace tax 7.
Peace tax 7. Peace tax.
Peace tax might be a
I
better,
feel
it's a
prefer
more
to have
positive
peace, but
name,
the
isn't it?
The Peace Tax 7 campaign is born, and we plan to take our case forward for a change in the law, a judicial review. Conscience, the Peace Tax campaign, supports us and have put us in touch with public interest lawyers, experts in judicial review, led by Human Rights Lawyer of the Year, Phil Shiner.
Well, I'm acting for a group called the Peace Tax 7, and they've instructed us to take a case on judicial review. I think it'd be plain to most judges that this is an important issue. It's never been ventilated before. You're not interested to public funds, and that bear in mind that judicial review is a fundamental part of our unwritten constitution. It must surely be right for you to have the right to have your case ventilated properly before a court. We're going to be putting an argument which says there's no need, it's a disproportionate response to your right to freedom of conscience to slam the door down and say under no circumstances whatsoever will we make any concession ever for people in your position.
Not being in receipt of public funds, the reality of how much this is going to cost begins to dawn on me. For starters, we've got to find £30,000 to pay the lawyers and barristers to take this case all the way to the High Court. But that's not all.
Law costs money, but the Treasury costs, that could be anything. If we lose, we could be into hundreds of thousands of quid, possibly. It depends what they spend, fighting the case. So what Phil's doing is asking for preemptive costs. And what that means is really just limiting it, saying, look, we won't, if we win, you won't have to pay any more than this, and if you win, we won't have to pay any more than this. And it's set at, he's going for £20,000. It sounds like a reasonable figure, but not too high. So basically, we're looking at raising £50,000 altogether.
Right, £50,000.
So jumble sales,
sales and
asking grand, we've really got to sort of get our skates on and try and get this money.
Right. Okay.
It really is uphill work to try and get Parliament to even look at this, and this is why we're trying the legal route. Because at the end of the day, the lawyers won't tell the government what they have to do. What they'll say to the government is there is an incompatibility between the Human Rights Act and the tax law, and it will make them think again, and this is what we need.
£50,000 is a lot of money to raise, but when I consider that it's the same amount as 5 cluster bombs, and when I consider that the British government is raising £5,500 million, that's £5.5 billion to fight this war, then it puts the £50,000 we need into some sort of perspective. If peace building's a costly business, is nowhere near as costly as war. The news since the invasion 21 months ago has gone from bad to worse. Today, Iraq is an environmental disaster zone. The country's infrastructure has been devastated. 100,000 civilians have been killed. Millions are without access to clean drinking water. Child mortality rates have doubled. There's over 1 million refugees, and there's talk of civil war. And here at home, the British intelligence services are warning of a possible terrorist attack. And so it seems that all the billions of pounds spent on the war haven't bought any of us much peace.
It's a sad fact that our government is entrenched in the archaic belief that the only way to resolve conflict is through bombing and invasion. But somehow causing the deaths of thousands of civilians, laying waste to vast acreages of property and reducing a state's economy to the Middle Ages is somehow solving a problem or making some sort of progress. So I'm no longer prepared to pay for killing, ruination and violently inflicted misery. It's an uncomfortable feeling to be breaking the law, but I feel a great deal better challenging the assumptions of this primeval government than not doing anything at all. I have to add, this is not a party political issue. This is about compassion, human conscience, and a paradigm shift towards a safer future. Thank you.
It's exactly 2 years today since the coalition went into Iraq. The warmongers, as it were, are in for the long haul, and I think the peacemongers have to be in for the long haul as well. So, turned a bit of a corner recently this week. The case has actually begun. Our lawyers have lodged papers with the High Court, and what this means is that we've applied for permission to have our case heard, and we're waiting for the court to decide on that. If they do decide that we've got a case, which we expect they will, then we'll get a hearing probably later in the year.
As the legal process moves forward, our campaign gains momentum. A year after forming, and with the generous backing of supporters, we managed to raise the £50,000 we need to fight our case. And in the summer of 2005, the High Court finally grants us permission to have our case heard. We arrive for our hearing in London only days after 52 people have been killed in suicide bombings, one device exploding on a bus in Tavistock Square, where, with a tragic irony, there's a garden dedicated to peace and to the victims of war, and a memorial to conscientious objectors who have established and are maintaining the right to refuse to kill. Tomorrow morning, in the High Court, the Treasury barristers will argue that taxpayers do not have the right to refuse to pay to kill, and our barristers will argue that we do have the right to refuse to pay to kill. And our hope is that tomorrow the judge will rule that any law that fails to acknowledge this right is in contempt of conscience. After a 3-hour hearing, the judge comes to a decision.
Let me just make sure I got the right one. Well, the first thing to say is that our appeal has been turned down, and I've got a short statement which we prepared in that eventuality. In matters of deliberate killing, personal conscience reigns supreme. On this issue, no state, not even a democratic state, can overrule the individual conscience. No state has the right to force its citizens to kill.
I feel a bit shaken. I thought at one point the judge was going to go on our side, and then he seemed to swing right towards the end. So it was quite a shock actually when he said he wasn't going to take it to judicial review. And so I do feel there's a bit of a state shock at the moment, because I think my expectations wear up as our lawyers start to put our very good arguments to him.
Killing another human being is in a totally different league than any other case you might make for your taxes to be diverted. So I just was very struck by the 7 of you, and I'm on the edge really wanting to do it myself as well. So I want to find out what and how you're doing it, and what's the right steps to win this right. It doesn't make sense. It is like listening to an addict who's telling you, I don't drink, I don't take drugs. The problem's all out there. That's what it sounds like to me. A culture addicted to violence.
But all isn't lost.
We know we've brought the case to the court, but we haven't really got a satisfactory response, have we, from the case? What do you think?
It's still ironic that Brenda's case, which was the first of our groups, she was told her only option was a judicial review, and that wouldn't work because the Human Rights Act wasn't in British law. Now the Human Rights Act is in British law, and still they say no judicial review.
Well, you know, we're still not getting our judicial review. We're trying to, and this judge has just looked at it and said we can't have a judicial review. But he is saying that we can appeal, and that's a hopeful thing.
That sounds to me like a really good opportunity that we should follow up.
Yes.
And push our way, you know, and make the appeal.
We go ahead and make our appeal, and our persistence finally pays off when the appeal court judges pronounce that previous rulings against us may have been legally unsound, and the judges advise us that having now taken our case through all the British courts, the way is open for us to proceed to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg.
Well, we've been through the British courts, and effectively what happened is they didn't say yes and they didn't say no. What we got was they called the match off and said this is not something for us to judge, this is something for Europe to judge, and go tell it to Europe. So we're going to tell it to Europe. While we've been doing this, we've made a lot of very interesting links with other peace tax campaigns in Europe. There's a tremendously exciting sense at the moment that from having been struggling away in our own little British corner, now suddenly there's a whole lot of other groups out there, and things are on a much bigger scale, on an international scale now, which is different from what it was before. It's an international problem, so the solution has to be an international solution, and we're doing our bit to start building that international solution.
We're going to put everything on this, you know, of what money we've got. We're going to have to pay it, you know, and put the money out and hope that it will achieve some part of what we want to do, which is a sort of freedom of behaviour.
We've been campaigning and fundraising for 4 years, and we'll be campaigning and fundraising for a while longer. After all, it took years of campaigning, even lifetimes, to abolish slavery, and nobody now would say that abolishing slavery was a bad idea. There's been a change in the culture, in the way that people think. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for here. A change in the way that people think about war, and a change in the way that people think about what it's acceptable to do to other human beings in the name of peace and truth and justice.
At the end of the day, I think will happen when we get some sort of right to divert taxes, is that will in a way put a still small voice in government. That will make government think, you're not really doing this right, are you? And it will make them think, and hopefully look at resolving conflicts in a different way than just sending the boys out to bash people.
Voices on the radio tell us that we're going to war. Those brave men and women in uniform, they want to know what they're fighting for. The generals want to hear the end game. The allies want to prove the plan. But the oil men in the White House, they just don't give a damn. 'Cause it's all about the price of oil. It's all about the price of oil. Don't give me no shit about blood, sweat, tears and toil. It's all about the price of oil.